the honourable member for Thunder Bay, Superior North, regarding democratic reform.
I believe so right now. Mr. Speaker, on March 25, I asked during question period, will the minister fix the real electoral problem and make our electoral system more proportional? The answer I received at the time was completely irrelevant to the question that I posed. I hope that the Parliamentary Secretary will attempt to provide a more on-topic response this evening. Unamended, Bill C-23 could have prevented thousands of Canadians from voting and likely violated the Charter in the process. I'm pleased to see that the Minister of State has finally agreed to amend some, at least some, of the most anti-democratic aspects of this legislation, but only after thousands upon thousands of Canadians stood up against this bill. However, Mr. Speaker, the fact remains. The real problem facing Canadian democracy is our first-past-the-post, antiquated, unfair, and undemocratic electoral system, which delivered 100% of the power to the party that received less than 40% of the vote in the last election. And what is the primary symptom of that? Many Canadians believe that their vote will not count, and increasingly they remain home on election day. Mr. Speaker, too few voters is not our problem in Canada. It is our problem in Canada, rather, not too many, as many voters stayed home during the last election as voted for the governing party. This appears to suit the Conservatives just fine. So, Mr. Speaker, what is the solution to this crisis in our democracy? The answer is to move to a more proportional voting system where every single vote counts and all Canadians have a genuine opportunity to have an equal say in selecting their government. First past the vote probably harms the electoral prospects of the Greens more than any other party. For example, in 2011, despite receiving almost 600,000 Canadian votes, the Green Party of Canada was only allowed one member in Parliament. In a proportional system where every vote counted, as in the vast majority of countries with real elections, these same 600,000 Canadians would have elected 12 Green members to Parliament. Yet, our unfair electoral system doesn't target only Greens, Mr. Speaker. It disenfranchises voters from coast to coast to coast, whose ballots, whether cast for Conservatives, New Democrats, or Liberals, are not reflected at all in the makeup of the House of Commons here today. Mr. Speaker, this huge group of Canadians of all political stripes cheated out of their votes adds up to approximately half of all eligible voters. Can we really be surprised that 40% of Canadians couldn't be bothered to cast a ballot in 2011? But there may be hope, Mr. Speaker. I see hope in the thousands of Canadians who spoke out against the Conservatives' Unfair Elections Act, forcing them to accept amendments to C-23. I also see hope in the widespread support that has greeted the important private members' bill, the Reform Act by the Conservative MP for Wellington-Halton Hills, which will allow MPs to return to working for their constituents. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years under this administration, these questions are increasingly understood as central to the health of our democracy. Electoral reform and restraining the centralized power of the Prime Minister and other party leaders must be understood as central to fixing the crisis in Canadian democracy and restoring Canadians' faith in our government. So I ask again, Mr. Speaker, rather than attempting to invent some fake plague of voter fraud, are the Conservatives prepared to fix the real problem facing Canadian democracy, and what are they prepared to do to ensure that every vote actually counts? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for his question. I note in his written question the reference was made regarding proportional voting compared, and he just expressed some concerns about the first-past-the-post system that we now use. And I also note that the member opposite was first elected as a member of the New Democratic Party, later to become an independent member of Parliament, and more recently to join a party again, in this case the Green Party. The Green Party, as we know, supports proportional voting. And as such, this question, we are here to deal with this question tonight. To the best of my knowledge, Mr. Speaker, the official opposition, the New Democratic Party, that this member was first elected to be a part of, has not stated publicly support for proportional representation voting. I mention only this because I would question if that member's constituents have given a mandate that supports proportional voting. In my home province of British Columbia, where the leader of the Green Party also represents an electoral riding, twice BC voters have rejected the very idea of a new electoral system. Now, while I understand that the Green Party supports the idea of proportional representation, I don't believe that there's a clear mandate for Canadians that is in agreement with this. And I would also point out in this place, I'm not aware of any of the official parties sharing support for proportional representation outside of this member's party. It is perhaps one of the few things that collectively many members of this House do agree upon. So in that respect, I would submit that it would be undemocratic to support voting systems that to date is only supported in place by the two members of the Green Party. Now, it should also must be pointed out that when you consider currently the proposed amendments to the Fair Elections Act, what remains of the bill, for the most part, are changes more of a technical nature as opposed to a wholesale change of our electoral process as the Green Party would prefer. For example, adding one more day of advanced polling, something that has shown increased usage by voters, is not, to the best of my knowledge, being opposed. Again, I would hope that the member opposite would think that offering an extra day so that any Canadian who would like to vote can find the time to do so and participate in our democracy. The very thing that he brought up in his comments, Mr. Speaker, pointing to the issue of not having enough people voting and participating. I hope this member would support it. Likewise, the stiffer penalties for impersonating Elections Canada staff, eliminating an old, decades-old provision for blacking out, certain electoral information. So people on the west coast of Canada wouldn't know what results there were. Obviously, social media has changed that. Closing loopholes around unpaid leadership loans and using estates bequests to circumvent donation limits are not aspects being opposed by the Fair Elections Act, and I've heard. And as for vouching, the member is likely aware that this is an issue being addressed by an amendment, although the majority of Canadians I have heard strongly from support that they want to see people have the ID necessary to vote. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would submit that the amendments to the Fair Elections Act will ultimately help eliminate irregularities in our voting system and ultimately to help increase voter participation because we all do want to see Canadians take their democratic rights and to take the opportunity to vote so that we can have a place in this mandate, Mr. Speaker, in order to do the work of the people. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Thunder Bay Superior North.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the honourable member is in error about the position of the NDP on this issue. They've always been in favour of proportional representation and still are. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-23 will be back before the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs late tonight. The leader of the Green Party will be tabling substantial amendments to this very flawed bill, and we all hope that C-23 looks very different when it returns to this House. My question this evening hasn't really been answered. I and hundreds of thousands of Canadians would like a proper response. Will the Conservatives fix the crisis in Canadian democracy resulting from the antiquated and anti-democratic electoral system that discards half the votes cast in every election? There is no evidence of voter fraud in Canada, but there's lots of evidence of electoral unfairness in the way this government abuses an already flawed electoral system. I will ask again, Mr. Speaker, will this Conservative government ensure equal and effective votes for all Canadians through a more proportional electoral system? Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly appreciate where that member is coming from. He obviously feels that that this particular proportional representation proposition is supported widely by the New Democrats. I haven't heard any New Democrat members come forward with that. However, that's their business to decide. Again, my constituents, I've been speaking to them about the Fair Elections Act, and they're quite happy with many of the provisions that are in there, and obviously that's why we consult wildly with our committee work, so we can, at the end of the day, have a very clear bill that has the majority support of Canadians. But Mr. Speaker, if he wants to question why there is not a proportional representation, proposal before the House, well, he has two options. Either they can elect more Green members in the following election and they can press for change, or that member can propose a bill in this House. When his leader proposed, she put forward a bill on Lyme disease, I think is certainly worthy of taking a look and supporting. But, Mr. Speaker, there's plenty of opportunities for them to advance their cause. It shouldn't be up to the government to enact their policies. It should be their responsibility.